Leo Sanchamanyabu Kechamalea to Itaiwai. Hi everyone. So today, I know I haven't posted in like a few weeks, but today I want to talk about how reclaiming your indigeneity, as someone who has indigenous roots from Mexico, that it doesn't make you immediately Mexica or Nahua or quote Aztec and or Maya even, because more and more Mexican people are beginning the process of reclaiming their indigenous roots, and which that is very deeply meaningful to everyone, especially indigenous communities from Mexico. And this often comes from a place of wanting to reconnect with your ancestors or your ancestral languages and the land that your family comes from, as well as like traditions that were suppressed through colonization and violence and assimilation, which that desire is valid and it deserves respect. However, there is something that kind of does need to be said, because misunderstanding uh, misunderstanding this topic causes harm to both indigenous communities and to people who are trying to reconnect in good faith, and which that is, being Mexican or having an indigenous ancestry from Mexico does not automatically mean that you're Mexica or Nahua or what's commonly referred as Aztec or even Maya. Those identities are not umbrella terms and they're not interchangeable with indigenous Mexican. Mexico is not just one indigenous culture, and it never has been. And before colonization, what is now called Mexico was home to hundreds of distinct nations or tribes. Each had their own language, territories, way of governing themselves, spiritual traditions, clothing, food, ceremonies, and ways of understanding the world. And many of those nations do still exist today, and they're not extinct. They're not extinct, and they're not myths, as they're living people. And the Mexica, they were one specific group of people among many. They were located in, they are located in what is now central Mexico. And the Nahua people includes multiple communities who speak very similar languages. But even within Nahua identity, those Nahua identity is very regional and cultural and has historical differences. These identities are specific, and they belong to the people whose families and histories and communities are rooted within these nations. And colonization pretty much, flattened that diversity. Spanish rule, followed by the creation of the Mexican nation state, pushed a narrative that erased tribal distinctions and replaced them with a single national identity, which was Mexican. And over time, many families lost their languages and their community ties, and some even the names of their nations and their tribe, from which their family came from. And because of this, when people begin to reclaim indigeneity, they often reach for what is most visible or what's most talked about, which usually ends up being Mexica or Aztec or even Maya, or even now, sometimes Purepecha. But that doesn't make someone, dishonest or make them malicious at all. But it does make their reclaiming process kind of like needing more care. And reclaiming indigeneity is not about choosing the most recognizable culture. It's about learning where your people are actually from. And it's about listening and researching and asking questions and accepting that the answer may be complicated, or even it depends on the place you're from, the region. And some, there just might not be an answer at all, just because of what has gone on through colonization. And there are hundreds of indigenous nations across Mexico, including, um, this is going to be a very short list of it, but like Zapotec, Mixtec, Purepecha, the Maya peoples, the Otomi, the Mazahua, the Tonac, Wixárika, Mayo, Yaqui, Seri, Triqui, Amusco, and, there's a bunch. There's hundreds. Um, And each of these cultures has its own beauty and history and living presence, and none of them are, lesser. None of them need to be replaced with a more famous name to be valid. Um, and reclaiming indigeneity does not mean that you suddenly inherit every tradition. It doesn't mean that you can claim, certain ceremonies or regalia or spiritual practices without understanding where they come from or who they belong to. And it does not mean that you must immediately label yourself as a specific nation if you don't know yet. And it is okay to say that, you are reconnecting to your indigenous roots and that you're still learning where your family comes from, because honesty matters. And true reclamation is slow, and it involves humility, and it involves acknowledging what was lost and what can be recovered and what may never fully return as what it originally was. And it also involves respecting living indigenous communities, especially those who have maintained their languages and their traditions despite, centuries of violence and erasure. Um, so yeah, indigeneity is not an aesthetic, it's not a costume, it's not a trend. It is a relationship, a responsibility, and community. So if you're Mexican and you're reclaiming or trying to reconnect to your indigenous roots, you don't need to become Mexica or Maya to be valid. You don't need to use Nahuatl words um, if they're not connected to your lineage. And you don't need to claim an identity that does not belong to you in order to feel connected, because your ancestors deserve to be known for who they actually were and are. And Mexico's indigenous cultures are vast and diverse and alive, and honoring them means learning, their differences and not collapsing them under one name. And reclamation done with care strengthens the community. And reclamation done with listening repeats this without listening repeats the same erasures that colonization created in the first place. So this work is not about claiming everything. It's about learning where you truly belong and respecting the boundaries that protect indigenous peoples today. So this was, a little talk that I wanted to get into. I know there's probably going to be some people that are mad at me. I don't care. So if you want to argue with me, go ahead. You have your right to what you want to say, but just know I don't care. So yeah, as you know, I'm Yaqui and Mexica, so I kind of have a way. I'm allowed to talk about this as well. So I hope you all are having a great day. I am planning on some pretty big projects to come to YouTube. So I hope you all have a great day. Get some food, get some water, get some rest, and take care of yourselves. Toa leo sin chimio koe te siavu, in leo sapo en chimak. Chocolat.